Her presentation is that everything that went wrong for Donald Trump in the first administration was the result of a fractious White House staff. Success depended on Trump being able to do what Trump wanted to do, let Trump be Trump. He doesn't want her on television. He feels she does not look the part. She's the most important person, or unimportant person. She knows in that classic kind of way, which you often don't find in politics, she knows her place.
Michael.
Joanna.
I am very excited about this episode because we are doing a deeper dive than usual into a character that I am really fascinated by, and I know you know a lot about.
The most important, unimportant person in the nation, or maybe the most important person in the nation.
Okay, who's almost never speaks on television. She's kind of silent, unlike normally people in this role who use the role to bolster themselves in some way, but she appears not to do that. Do you want to reveal the name of our subject?
Well, it's Susie Wiles, who is the Trump's chief of staff, which makes her in any traditional hierarchy certainly the second most important person in the United States government. Now, whether she is or she isn't actually is part of our discussion today, but she really occupies a pivotal position, and because it is under Trump, of a very tricky, problematic, a position that tends to get people killed off rather quickly. So she's on the verge of the Trump's longest chief of staff, serving chief of staff, was John Kelly, former General John Kelly, and he served for just about a year and a half, and that was a deeply, deeply unhappy term, both for him and for Trump. But it's so far for Susie Wiles, it's actually has been quite a copacetic position. I mean, she's not only survived this long and will certainly surpass John Kelly, but she could go for all 4 years.
All 4 years. Well, and as we know, she had an alcoholic father, which she has talked about, who was a sportscaster. And
a famous sportscaster, actually, a sort of pivotal person in television sports.
Right, so she has extreme experience of handling a megalomaniacal type figure, I imagine her father was, but certainly a famous figure. And women used to dancing on the edge of that are often very capable of dealing with, I think, people like Donald Trump. But before we get into that, why don't we explain for anyone new listening to Inside Trump's Head, where we go on a regular 3 times a week basis, what we're trying to do here? Why are we different to other podcasts? I often ask myself that. But I think we know.
I never ask myself that because it seems completely apparent to me that most of the world analyzes Trump in rather traditional terms. He's the president of the United States. This is how politics functions. This is how governments function. The people who talk about these subjects know very well all of the levels of how one traditionally looks at the president at the center of politics, of government, of his party, all of the pressures that are on him, all of the essentially cause and effect matrix that makes him do what he does. Our position is that none of this matters. This is a government of one. Trump doesn't care about politics, doesn't care about government, has no advisors, so really responds to no one, has no goals in the traditional sense of an agenda that a president wants to accomplish. Everything he does comes out of what he wakes up in the morning thinking. So it is all out of Trump's head. Therefore, to understand what he's doing, we need to be inside Trump's head.
Well, even a government of one needs a support staff around them. And Susie Wiles appears to be, at least for the time being, a crucial cog in the Trump government wheel. We mentioned that her father was Pat Summerall, who she's often referred to as an alcoholic. We know that he was a player. He was a phrase I still find as originally a Brit very confusing, a tight end in the NFL. And then he became a commentator and sort of brought the NFL alive for American viewers. So it's not like she grew up somewhere and came out of nowhere. But nevertheless, she certainly run Trump in a different way to traditional chiefs of staff.
Well, I think I'm going to push back on that she runs Trump. And that would reasonably have been said about most traditional chiefs of staff. That was their job. Their job was to protect the president. Their job was to advise the president. Their job is often to steer the president. I mean, it is the person behind the throne, and often that's the person who makes the difference between a successful presidency and a failed presidency. And, there's a traditional kind of thing. Who should your chief of staff be? Well, your chief of staff should be someone whose in intelligence and acumen you respect and, more importantly, trust. So, and that often adds up to who's one of the people closest to you, a friend, personally or professionally. And one of the major differences here with Trump is that he doesn't have that person. He's never had that person. Arguably, he has no friends. Arguably, he has nobody he trusts. So then that has become that makes it very difficult. Then who do you put into this role in which you have to depend upon someone and trust them and actually believe them and have someone who's going to work in your best interest. In the first Trump administration, that was a grievous problem. He could find no chief of staff to do that job in a way that he was comfortable with, and a way that he found helpful, and actually in a way that he did not find utterly antagonistic.
Well, he went through several, right? Reince Priebus, who came out of the RNC. Then he went through General Kelly. And when Kelly emerged from the White House, Kelly himself seemed extremely bitter and angry about the experice. And then
traumatized, really.
Right, traumatized.
This was, and full of, essentially he openly, a top-ranking general who was in this role, and basically came as close to vilifying Trump and to declaring him, everything that we discuss here, Trump's stupidity, Trump's lack of interest in virtually anything, his refusal to absorb information.
One shouldn't laugh. I'm always saying one shouldn't laugh, but it's impossible not to laugh. John Kelly not only trashed Trump, which is something very unusual for a general to do, but he was one of the signatories of the campaign in the 2024 election, which said this man is unfit for office. Do you remember? There was a whole list of generals who worked alongside Trump who just said, do not do this.
Again, one of those other interesting things, how does Trump recover from this? The person who has worked most closely with him comes out and publicly disavows him. And what effect did that have on Trump? Literally none
Well, and
whatsoever.
Trump immediately trashed him too. I mean, they both trashed each other. It was just so unspeakably well, it was just sort of so wrong it demeaned the office of the presidency. However, he now has in place Susie Wiles. So,
Well, just go finish the two other. After John Kelly came Mark Mulvaney, who was is previously the head of the Office of Budget and Management, and Mulvaney, who I spent a fair amount of time with, is a extremely conservative, but a reasonable, thoughtful person. And he refused to take the title of chief of staff. He made it clear he was always the acting chief of staff because he was ready to escape at any minute.
What a smart thing to do, just put acting in front of the title.
Yes, and he did have to escape shortly, in short order. And then Mark Meadows, who was a congressman, a senior person in the Freedom Caucus, which is the congressional caucus of the most right-wing people, but also someone who I've spent time with and thought, well, this is I'm a total right-winger and unreasonable in that, but actually reasonable in person, a professional, and his tenure. Well, his tenure, and it was interesting because he was in that job on January 6th, one of the few people left in the White House with the president on January 6th. But he understood that the job was to stay as far away from the president of the United States as possible. That was the only ticket of survival. So he became, I'm not sure I would say an ineffective chief of staff, because each in their way are ineffective, but a chief of staff who understood that there were very clear limitations on what he might possibly do.
All right. Well, that brings us to Trump 2. Very different scenario. Trump has learned that the only thing he wants from people, from his cabinet secretaries, from the staff around him, is utter 100% loyalty. He doesn't want what happened in Trump 1, which is people worked for him, then came out and immediately trashed him. We've talked about John Kelly. And then you remember Rex Tillerson, who was his first Secretary of State, saying that Trump was an absolute moron. I mean, just shockingly basic descriptions of the president too. So how does he bring Susie Wiles into the fold? Where does she come from in Trump world?
Okay, so she is a Florida political operative. She's from Florida. Her entire career has been spent with campaigns in Florida, senior campaigns in senior positions. She's a well-known person in Florida politics. You hire her if you're running for office, and you need someone to run your campaign. She's a political operative, so she comes into the campaign, the first campaign, and that's Trump. And her job is in 2016 to run the state of Florida for Trump.
And shouldn't we point out that she actually got Rick Scott, the governor of Florida, elected in an unexpected victory?
Was that before or
no?
After?
That was before. That was 2010.
Yeah, yes. As
so
I say,
just one of her achievements.
She's a senior person, highly respected in Florida politics. She's not she's not a super right winger, not a super conservative. She's a professional. What is her job? Her job is to win. It is not an ideological job. She comes into she's hired for the Trump campaign, 2016. Trump meets her, has a brief conversation with her, goes back to his aides. Actually, I think it was Steve Bannon at the time, and says, she looks like a refrigerator. Get rid of her. They don't get rid of her because she has a good reputation. They don't get rid of, then really they have nobody else to replace her with. They don't get rid of her, and she flips the state. So Florida, which previously had been several instances of voting for a Democrat for president, actually more likely to vote for a Democrat for president, or to come very close, as in Bush v. Gore in 2000. But she flips it decisively for Trump in 2016. Really, the moment in which he wins the election. She then goes on after that to run DeSantis's campaign, and they have a terrible, in the annals of Florida politics, memorable falling out, and it's hard to get an actual explanation for what happened here, but everybody accuses the others, including of stealing and perfidy of all kinds of
Florida politics
levels.
as usual.
Yeah, and it's and they end up with a kind of blood score against her. Okay, meanwhile, Trump is defeated in 2020. He goes back to Mar-a-Lago. His expectation is that his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, will basically, be his right-hand man in defeat, his assistant, his whatever, chief of staff, let's say. Jared wants nothing to do with that role. No way is he going to get stuck with his father-in-law in his time in the wilderness. And Jared retreats to Miami and puts in Susie Wiles. He's the person who hires Susie Wiles, the refrigerator, to run Trump's office at Mar-a-Lago. Now, this is not a big job. I mean, she has had considerable jobs, elected governors and senators in Florida, but at this point she's 66, I think. So, politics is a, so to speak, young man's game, and this is a pretty good job. She'll run Trump's out of office, and it's a kind of a retirement job.
I've never heard anybody say American politics is a young man's game recently, because it seems full of the gerontology.
Political operatives.
Okay. Political operatives. Okay.
Yes.
They're full of the gerontocracy.
Yeah. No, political operatives. It's a young man's game because it's so hard, the job, to be a political operative. You're first thing, you're at the beck and call of an idiot. And not just Trump, most politicians. Really, that relationship between the candidate and the people who work for them is often a toxic relationship.
I was going to say it's often abusive. Yeah.
But you're on the road all of the time. The accommodations are terrible. The food is terrible. The hours are grotesque. So it is. It is hard to be. It is hard to do this with any level of maturity, because then you say, well, life is too short. At any rate, but she gets this job. It's not a bad job for her to be in Mar-a-Lago. It's a nice environment, not too pressured. What's Trump going to do? He's going to endorse a few candidates, make a few speeches. That's what a former president does. Well, obviously, something else happened here, and at which point it becomes highly relevant that she has this blood fight with DeSantis, because Trump is in part prompted into the race because he is furious that the governor of Florida, DeSantis, who he always maintained is the governor because Trump endorsed him, would have the temerity to run against him, to become the alternative to Donald Trump. So their campaign begins, and also Wiles is very focused on the fact that she has an opportunity for vengeance against Ron DeSantis.
And we shouldn't forget that Ron DeSantis really did seem like a viable candidate at one point. I mean, certainly the Murdoch press were behind him. He did well keeping Florida open during COVID. And yet his personality seemed to get in the way. Do you remember his terrible decision with the Don't Say Gay bill in Florida? And he just, having come out of COVID sort of ahead, just began to make one mistake after another.
Well, he's just an unpleasant person in every way, and radiated his unpleasantness. But you're right, and there's a moment in I think it's in the fall of 2022 when the New York Times analyzes his numbers. I guess it's just after the midterms when he's resoundingly reelected as Florida's governor, and the Times goes through the numbers and basically says, well, with numbers like this at this point in the cycle, he will be unbeatable. But the Trump team, led by Susie Wiles at this point, goes to work against him, and not only beats him, but basically destroys him and his political future. And she runs a very efficient campaign, a very tight campaign, efficient campaign. She does this, her co-head of the campaign, and that's always a little bit of a tension, is he co or co minus? Is this guy Chris LaCivita? She also has the third member of the campaign was Jason Miller, who had been, is a loyal, trusted, loyal Trump lieutenant, and with very little friction in the campaign, very little, it sometimes seemed, effort even. I mean, Trump is still playing throughout the campaign. He's doing 18 holes of golf every morning. Of how many presidential candidates, can that be said? And they as we know, obviously they win. And it's very clear. I mean, there's a slight bit of jockeying, as there always is, about who's going to be the chief of staff. And of course, Susie Wiles says it's not her. She doesn't want to be the chief of staff. She's a grandmother. It's time to go home. But of course, she does want to be the chief of staff. And in fact, in a very, strategic way, pushes out everybody else who might challenge her. Chris LaCivita does not get a job in the White House. Jason Miller decides not to pursue a job in the White House. And it is Susie Wiles. And her deal with Trump, and basically to the extent that she makes a presentation, why it should be her, her presentation is that everything that went wrong for Donald Trump in the first administration was the result of a fractious White House staff. Success depended on two things, in her view: Trump being able to do what Trump wanted to do, let Trump be Trump, and him not to be frustrated by internecine squabbling at every single minute. And you have to remember how bad the first administration was. I mean, these people within the West Wing would have killed each other. I mean, between Bannon and Kushner, Gary Cohn, Kellyanne Conway, whoever, John Kelly, Reince Priebus.
Well, and random people from The Apprentice who showed up.
Totally, Dina Powell. I mean, this was every day, every single day, somebody could have killed somebody else.
And that division was very much playing out in public too, which made them look really like they were amateurs.
Enormous churn, the door, everybody getting fired constantly. We often talk about now that nobody has been in more than a year. Nobody has been fired.
So can I just ask you something? Because one of the things Susie Wiles did in her earlier career was she worked in the Reagan administration learning scheduling, which is something that political operatives do. And it teaches you a lot about access and about the control of access. To what extent is she the main gatekeeper for Trump now?
I think this is important because she is not.
Interesting. Go on.
What she has managed to do is to absent herself from Donald Trump's immediate circle. So she runs the West Wing. She runs the staff. But she's very clearly does not run Donald Trump. To some extent, he's doing his own scheduling. To some extent, he's relying on Stephen Miller, a few other people who are suggesting, and a lot of the scheduling is, of course, pro forma, and it's just waving in whoever gets online to see him, and that will somewhat go through Susie Wiles. But again, on the pro forma side, on the side where it has occupies Trump's mind share, she's not getting involved in that.
Is the reason that this White House has been so much more effective in getting the stuff done that Trump wants to get done because of Susie Wiles?
No, I would say it's because of Trump. In other words, Trump is, yes, it's because of Susie Wiles, in which she takes whatever Trump says as the orders, pretty much unquestioning. That's what's going to happen today. And there's very little pushback on that and very little second guessing of that. But all that comes from Trump when it would have otherwise come from a chief of staff.
So I'm not quite sure I understand what she is running. If Trump is basically running Trumpism and doing all the things that he wants to do, from Venezuela to now Iran, what does running the White House actually mean?
Well, as I said, if you compare it to Trump 1 to Trump 2, Trump 1 was this incredibly fractious White House staff, which was always working against Trump in one way or another. And if you then trade that out for a staff that is entirely, or as much as possible, runs smoothly in a very clear hierarchy. Susie Wiles is in charge of the White House staff. She's not in charge of Donald Trump. She's in charge of the White House staff. That's these are the people who basically, yes, are responsible for carrying out Donald Trump's whims, desires, momentary inspirations, long-term policy, whatever, all of that, and they answer to effectively one person, who is Susie Wiles. And to the extent that they answer also to Donald Trump, that would be Stephen Miller, for instance, Susie Wiles is deft enough not to try to compete with that. So
psychologically, what is it about Susie Wiles that allows her to get on with Trump? And I guess there's the obvious observation that she's a woman and the first 4 chief of staffs were all men. But how do they actually get on? What's she like when she's with him?
Deferential. She listens, never interrupts. She is more like an office manager.
And she's never on television. I mean, you don't see her in the way that if you think of Rance Priebus was often on television, John Kelly was often on television. She doesn't seem to be searching for a spotlight on herself.
And I mean, there's a sort of background. He doesn't want her on television. He feels she does not look the part. So we're back to the refrigerator.
I was going to ask you about that because she seems so un-MAGA in terms of her presentation. She's got a hairstyle much like the old Queen of England, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, a sort of shampoo and set, a grey
Yeah,
hair.
and she's we should just check her age at the moment. But I think she's 67 or 68, and a grandmother, and very much out of character for any of the women who surround Trump.
Right, she's completely un-MAGA. She's 68, so she's a lot older than certainly the younger women who, the Margot Martins, the Natalie Harps, the sort of Melania, the much younger versions of Melania who run the sort of office. But she's also unlike Kristi Noem, she's unlike Ivanka in terms of how she presents.
No, I mean, Trump, when he was in Trump Tower and running the Trump organization, always had a loyal assistant, loyal secretary then. And her name then for many years was Rona Graff. Mm-hmm. And very much in the mode of Susie Wiles, highly competent, highly organized, highly deferential, totally on the page that Donald Trump wanted her to be on. And that's Susie Wiles' accomplishment. That's why I say she's the most important person or unimportant person. She knows in that classic kind of way, which you often don't find in politics, she knows her place.
And how do other Republicans think of her? Because you've mentioned he calls her the refrigerator, partly to do with the fact that she does seem to choose a lot of ice-type colours, although I suspect he's more referring to her shape. But she's also known as the Ice Maiden within certain layers of the Republican Party. How does John Thune, how do Mike Johnson think of her?
I don't really think that they have strong feelings. She isn't really a gatekeeper, and she isn't really someone imposing policy. She's a conduit. She's a good person to have on your side. But because she not, and I think it's also important to remember, she has no real ideological position here. You can't say she's a MAGA person. You can't say she's a Trumper. In actually classic terms, she's a pretty traditional rhino type. I mean, she's a traditional Republican.
So traditionally, as we've said, also the people closest to Trump don't last, or certainly in the previous administration, they didn't last. Is Susie the exception to this rule? Does she stick around for the duration, do you think?
Well, I think that prompts the question of where is she vulnerable? And curiously, I think she's probably vulnerable on the midterms. I mean, the midterms have the potential to be a seismic event. And usually when that happens, and when the seismic event threatens to bury you, which might very well happen here, somebody has to pay. There then is incredible pressure to change course, to dig your way out. And that often implies you have to have different new people to do it. You've been buried because of the people who are in place. So therefore you have to get rid of them.
Okay, but for example, in a recent podcast, you talked about how the vax and RFK Jr.'s more eccentric ideas, well, terrifyingly eccentric ideas on public health were being reined in because they understood, A, the numbers aren't good, B, people are getting measles, but C, it's not going to play well in the midterms. Is that Susie Wiles giving that information to Trump? How is he getting that information, or is she reining in RFK Jr.? Is she telling him you can't talk about this?
She is the one reining in RFK Jr. Where is Trump getting that information? She may be supporting that, but she's not going to initiate that information. That view is coming from Trump on the telephone.
Okay, so people are
People are
saying to
talking
him,
to him, and they're saying this vax stuff is really not playing. And then he may ask for stuff. How's this vax stuff playing? Are there any polls on any vax polls? But that's also problematic in Trump terms, because Trump basically asks for polls to confirm what he wants confirmed. So he's coming into this. He's picking up that this vax stuff is not playing, and most of the people that he speaks to, who are likely Republican billionaires, and they're going, and they are not MAGA people, and they are people who clearly are saying, what the devil is this vax stuff going on? This is crazy. My kids are getting vaxxed. My family is getting vaxxed.
Right, they don't want their grandchildren getting measles. So is Susie Wiles able to deliver Donald Trump bad news?
No, nobody delivers Donald Trump's bad news. That's why she would, and she most of all would understand that's not a good look. So Trump gets, I mean, it's an important aspect of this administration. Trump functionally and fundamentally gets no bad news. Even if the news is bad, and even it has to be delivered, it's delivered actually as though it were good news. So she is what Susie Wiles does, and perhaps this goes to being a woman in that role.
Oh, the Amagansett noon horn.
It's noon.
I love that sound. So funny. It's a wonderfully small town.
So she is, and again, perhaps because she's a woman, she is versed in handling him. And it's all about handling. Where other chiefs of staff, it's all about decision making and in a kind of hierarchy of information and management and executive function. With Susie Wiles, it's about handling a very, very difficult guy.
Well, and as she said, recently to Chris Whipple, who interviewed her 11 times for a piece in Vanity Fair, because she was used to dealing with an alcoholic father, she could deal with Donald Trump, who refers to himself as an alcoholic's personality, even though he doesn't drink. So she's used to that treading on eggshells, to looking for warning signs, for being triggered by anything that makes Donald Trump feel uncomfortable.
During the campaign, people would speak to me about Susie, and with relative respect, I would say. I mean, this is people in the campaign or satellites to the campaign, but they always pointed out that she was more concerned with herself and her operation, the press it got, the the management structure of it, than she was with the president and what people said about Trump, and what people said about Trump, and how he functioned even within the overall campaign. So she saw this as almost as a parallel function instead of an intersecting function. She was not running him. She was not taking him over. She was not instructing him. She was not informing him. She was not his interface with the world. She was someone who had created this organization to support him. So incredibly, and I think we can, you know, smart. She has played this the only way you might successfully play it.
Right. And it seems to have brought some stability, at least to the organization that, as you say,
incredible stability.
Right.
I mean, that is what's the difference between Trump 1 and Trump 2? The
Right.
stability of the organization around him.
Okay, so for the billionaires that Trump is talking to and his deal guys, is Susie talking to them first? Do they call her and say, hey, what's the big guy, thinking about? Or, hey, how do we get him to think differently about vax? Or, hey, we're worried about the midterms. We want deregulation. The Democrats get in, it's all over.
No.
So she's not advising any of those people. They're not calling her.
She might be confirmed. They're speaking to him first.
Right. Okay. And then any of them calling her, does she have, what I'm asking is she back channeling anything? Does she talk to people at Fox News because we know he watches Fox and then takes policy ideas from it? Is she talking to people all the time at Fox?
I wouldn't say all of the time at Fox. Yes, she is there. And some people, after they speak to Trump, are then calling her, and they probably have a particular agenda about what they want her to do, or what they want her to support about their agenda. And similarly at Fox, the key people at Fox are speaking directly to Trump.
So Sean Hannity calls him regularly.
They might follow up with Wiles in terms of scheduling something, or in terms of who the White House might make available to Fox. So she's very much, and would very much see herself and want her to be seen as a logistical person, and which then, by the way, highlights this other really interesting aspect about the Trump administration and how Trump functions, is that so many people have direct access to him. So again, he is, and he would say this, who is his real chief of staff? He's his real chief of staff.
Well, as we know, the only person he listens to is himself. Who's MAGA? It's Donald Trump. I am MAGA. What's to stop him starting any kind of war? Only his morality stops him from doing it.
So she would not presume to be inside of Donald Trump's head. At the same time, she has paid close attention to what is inside Trump's head, and she responds to that. So, and she never crosses that. She knows what he needs, what he expects, and the kinds of things that will create friction. So she creates no friction. So she's literally the perfect assistant.
And okay, so she's the perfect assistant. So she's anticipating when he's hungry. She's anticipating when he needs a lie down. She's like an assistant / nanny, because for the most part, he does behave like a child.
Yes.
I wonder if she ever comes in and says, it's time for some quiet time, Donald. You need a timeout.
No, because that would be an incursion.
Right, and that would be telling him off, which she's not allowed to do.
She's not telling him anything. And she's, very good, make the trains run on time. So logistics are her forte. I mean, he was very pleased with her during the campaign, not least of all, one of her main things, because she kept close watch on the spending. So and he often says with pride, she's very cheap.
She's very cheap. How much
She's
does she
very
get?
cheap. So she says she's very cheap. She doesn't spend my money.
How much does she get paid? Do we know?
I'm sure it's public. I don't know, but it is I mean,
It's a
a fair
government
amount of money.
salary.
Yes, it's a government salary. And she could, and many people who have this role, of course, go on to make bazillions of dollars off of it. But I'm not sure. And Trump, that's actually another interesting point, because Trump resents the possibility of that. Any idea that Trump has that you're making money off of him is makes you somehow disloyal to him and an antagonist. And I think with Susie Wiles, it is quite possible that she leaves this job and then does go into some form of retirement.
With her grandchildren.
So again, all of this kind of thing creates a context, a context which works for Trump, but which I actually think he's surprised about. He's surprised that this grandmother is as successful as she is in acting in his interests. He would not have. This is not someone he would have if he had been doing the casting, which in some sense he is always doing. He certainly would not have cast her.
Well, it's fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And of course, whether or not she'll be the sacrificial lamb at the midterms if they lose the House to the Democrats, or even if they lose the House and the Senate to the Democrats.
Yeah, and I suspect that she won't be. I mean, it's a point of vulnerability, but she's very, very good, as we've seen, at survival here. She has been close to Trump now, effectively his chief of staff, since 2022, so almost 4 years now.
And what sort of relationship does she have with the First Lady, with Melania Trump?
I think she has no relationship or a very functional business-like relationship.
And what did she make of Elon? Remember, I mean, again, we've all forgotten this, but Elon Musk with his chainsaw coming in for the first 3 months of the Trump administration with Doge, that seemed to come and go very quickly, and we've all forgotten about it, and no one talks about it anymore.
Yeah, and I think that that's partly because of her. I think she navigated that. I think she recognized that that was dangerous for all kinds of reasons. And it existed because of Trump was having a
crush on Elon Musk, the richest man in the world.
Yes. I was going to say a flirtation or a kind of
an infatuation. It felt like
a brain freeze about this, and that this would pass. She just had to manage it, and I think, I think that many people or a group of people around Trump understood that this was just something that had to be endured, and then it would come to a natural end, which it did.
So we know that she worked for Marco Rubio. Assuming the Democrats win the House in the midterms and possibly the Senate, all eyes will be on Trump's successor. Do you think Susie will have an influence there?
Well, I'm thinking how this will play, because the factors are the following. Yes, she is a Marco Rubio partisan. She has worked for Rubio. She was the voice that was really advocating Rubio for the vice presidency. And then the voice, when she understood that that had reached its limits, she became the voice advocating for J.D. Vance. But in this situation, yes, I think that she would very clearly be the Rubio partisan. But very clearly, if she goes this far, would understand that in the end, Trump is not going to want anyone to at all compromise his position in the Republican Party, his position in history, his position in whatever he does, in whatever role he wants to assume next.
It's fascinating. Well, Michael, we'll continue to talk about Susie Wiles, but I think very helpful to have a sort of strong sense of who she is, what she's actually doing at the White House, and why Trump is being so much more successful in getting things done in this second administration. And you really don't hear people coming out and trashing him in the way that they used to. She's brought a level of discipline, which
I mean, it is highly disciplined. I mean, first thing, one would be even hard pressed to name the significant people in the West Wing at this point. James Blair, a highly significant person there, but who has heard of him? A guy, Taylor Budovich, who she got rid of. I mean, she had brought him in, and he became a kind of an irritating upstart and important figure. But then she quietly dispatched him. So she is running this White House operation in such a distinctly different way than the first Trump White House ran. And again, letting him be him. Everybody else, in that first White House, it was like, Trump is an uncontrollable force who we have to control. That's our job here. Virtually everybody in the Trump White House saw their job, their challenge, their opportunity to control Trump. Susie Wiles, the exact opposite. Her job, her opportunity, and her place in history comes from not remotely trying to control this guy.
All right, so if you have comments about Susie Wiles or questions for Michael about Susie Wiles, why don't you put them in our comment field in YouTube? Feel free to join our Beast tier of Daily Beast YouTube subscribers, and we'll be back. We'll be back in 2 days. We'll be back in 2 days with more. But Susie Wiles, of course it's a woman over 60 who's running the place. Of course it is. I don't find that remotely surprising.
And no, I mean, it's a kind of brilliant piece of reverse chemistry.
So the good news is we have so many Beast tier members now. There are too many names to read out, and we really appreciate your support. Thanks to our production team, Devon Rogerino, Ryan Murray, Rachel Passer, Heather Passaro, Neil Rosenhaus.